there's a good chance that we may look back at last night as the beginning of the end of the Republican presidential primary. The start of a general election campaign is going to be unlike any other. Yes, the New Hampshire primary was a decisive win for Donald Trump, the kind of win that squashes any momentum for his one remaining challenger, Nikki Haley. But buried in last night's results are also some very hard truths about Americans' views of Donald Trump, of Trumpism, and the state of our democracy. As the Bulwark put it today, Nikki Haley has now beaten Donald Trump twice in Iowa and New Hampshire, among two groups of voters who, in a saner world, would be deciding the Republican presidential nomination. The first group is Republican primary and caucus voters who acknowledge that Trump legitimately lost the 2020 presidential election. The second group, which overlaps with the first, is Republican primary and caucus voters who accept that if Trump were to be convicted of a crime, he would be unfit to serve as president. Exit polling from NBC News shows that while the Republican base may have stuck with Trump, not everyone who voted in last night's primary lives in the Earth 2 concocted by Trump and his allies. From NBC News, quote, just 13% of Haley voters said they would be satisfied with Trump's winning the GOP nomination, while 86% of her voters said he wouldn't be fit to serve as president should he be convicted of a crime. We're talking about voters like this.
I voted for Nikki Haley because I was voting against Donald Trump.
And what propelled you to get to this point?
I'm 74 years old. I've lived in a constitutional democracy all my life. I want to remain that way, and I want my grandchildren to grow up in one, not a dictatorship.
The outcome last night makes it all the more likely that it will fall on Democrats to assemble a coalition of voters, clear-eyed about the threat posed by an ex-president who has made his campaign about his own legal woes and his disdain for the rule of law. And that is where we start today with co-founder and executive director at Protect Democracy, Ian Bassin, plus editor-at-large for The Bulwark, Charlie Sykes. And here with me at the table, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University and host of the podcast A Word, Jason Johnson, joins us. Thank you so much for being here with me. Let's start with you. You looked at these results. What stuck out to you?
Oh, wait, Nikki Haley lost. Like, we knew that was going to happen, right? Like,
right.
There was no surprise here. It was it wasn't a playoff game. It wasn't anything we're surprised about. But Donald Trump performing so poorly with independent voters has got to make Democrats happy. The fact that you had people like that woman's not the only person who was like, I don't want this man to become president. If that is an attitude that is sort of the feeling, maybe even just 5% of Republican voters, if they've now gotten to a point where like, okay, this guy is gross, he's disgusting, and those people happen to be in Pennsylvania and happen to be in Michigan and happen to be in Georgia, then this is a very good sign for Joe Biden. But again, this race is not over by any means, and I mean the presidential race, because we've still got months more for these guys to really convince America to be excited about this.
Ian, you, me, Jason Johnson, Charlie Sykes, we are all on the same page here, right? Which is last night, we're not talking about the horse race. We're not talking about some normal election. We are talking about the fate of democracy as we know it. That's why this is interesting to us. That's why those exit polls were interesting to us. When you look at those numbers, when you look at those two groups that Nikki Haley was able to carry in two different states, what does that tell you about a general election matchup that could be Donald Trump and Joe Biden?
Well, Donald Trump has been a disaster for the Republican Party in every election, basically, since 2016, because there remains in this country a pro-democracy coalition that cuts across Democrats, independents, Republicans, progressives, and conservatives. But that doesn't change the incredible danger that we face, because as New Hampshire voters were sending, I think, a pretty clear signal that they didn't really like the Republican frontrunner, elected Republicans continued to line up behind Donald Trump. Even some of the Senate holdouts, like Senator John Cornyn, Senator Deb Fischer, cast their endorsements for Trump recently. And so even though this president has launched this ex-president has launched a violent insurrection to try to overthrow the will of voters, he's not paying as much of a consequence within his party as he should. And as every parent knows, if your child steals cookies from the cookie jar and rather than face consequences, they're celebrated by their friends and the parents say, hey, that's quite okay, no problem, they're going to do it again. And not only are they going to take the cookies, but if you keep not imposing consequences, they're going to take the bank account and the matches too.
I will take that to heart, not just as political analysis, but also as parenting advice. Charlie, let's talk a little bit about Trump's speech from last night. I'm not going to play it for you, but here's how Axios reported it. Ironically, Trump repeated many of his false claims about past elections, including that he won New Hampshire in 2020, while calling Haley delusional for acting as if she had a good night. Demanding that Haley drop out, Trump went on to say that she would be under investigation if she won, ominously suggesting there are skeletons in Haley's closet that she doesn't want to talk about. I mean, it's a torrent of lies, baseless claims, conspiracies, perhaps questions about his acuity. Yes, to that point, it is Donald Trump. No real surprises there. And yet, also a reminder, he's not changing his tune as he gets to a general election in order to try to persuade a different group of voters.
No, it was bitter. It was bitter, and it was vindictive. It was Donald Trump, the man in full, and behind him was arrayed all of his fellow Republicans who are applauding him, and it has now propelled him to the nomination. But now we have this very significant pivot. The things that he's been able to say and do and be rewarded in a Republican primary are going to play very differently. I mean, I want you to the point that we've been making here. Iowa and New Hampshire voters have been paying close attention. They have been watching what Donald Trump is doing. And there is a very, very large portion of that electorate now, moderates, independents, soft Republicans, who are repelled by Donald Trump. And so we now need, as opposed to being now continue to be obsessed with the MAGA hardcore types in the focus groups and the diners, we now need to pay a lot more attention to these swing voters who may, or around the country, who may or may not know all the things that Donald Trump has been saying, that he's been promising. And Donald Trump has convinced himself that he can say and do anything, and there will be no consequences. Well, there are no consequences in this Republican Party, but it is far from clear that there will be no consequences now in a general election where millions of people are going to be tuning in and they're going to be watching this guy. Maybe they've become numb, maybe they'd forgotten who he is, but Donald Trump is going to remind them over and over and over again over the next couple of months. And that is a whole new phase of this campaign.
And Trump also suggesting that the only way President Biden would win is, quote, if they cheat. I mean, he's clearly already setting the stage to deny the election results. Again, I wonder this far out, what can be done preemptively, legally, to prepare for what seems like an inevitable reality?
Well, I'm a Yankees fan, so I'll quote Yogi Berra, which is it's like deja vu all over again. This is what he did in the lead up to 2020 that caused thousands of people to storm our Capitol and interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. You know, and there's this fantasy out there that if somehow we simply let Donald Trump run in the election and voters cast him out at the ballot box, then everything's going to go swimmingly. He's proven previously that that's not how it plays out because he's not fundamentally committed to letting voters decide. He's not committed to letting juries render a verdict on him. He's not willing to let people run against him. And our Constitution has a provision in it to deal with people like that. It's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which the Supreme Court will consider on February 8th. And it prevents people who have violated an oath to our Constitution, who have engaged in insurrection against this country, from allowing that whole cycle to play out again, because that is what is truly dangerous for our country.
I mean, Ian, what you were doing is you were reminding us that there actually are guardrails. The Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, among them, there are also guardrails like the power of the House of Representatives and Senate to impeach, and yet none of these guardrails seem to have been able to contain him. So I think what I am hearing from you is if we get to this point where Donald Trump is the Republican nominee and Donald Trump runs against President Biden and he loses, and he, as you said, repeats history, goes back to square one, says that it was an unfair election, doesn't accept the results of election, calls his supporters to come to his aid, that we will have to look at ourselves as a country and ask why none of those guardrails were utilized and why none of those guardrails held.
Well, I do think that in a lot of ways, the guardrails have done a good job. They may not be doing a perfect job, but they've done a good job. Let's remember that it is rare and unique in history and international experience for an autocrat to rise to the highest office in the land and then leave at the end of their first term. Typically, that does not happen, and that happened here in the United States. So that is one way in which our guardrails have proven quite resilient. And another is we're having a conversation here about just what a weak candidate Donald Trump is, just how many people in his own party are voting against him. And that's also because he's been indicted 91 times for felonies. He's twice impeached, because these consequences, while they may not have delivered a knockout blow yet, they are adding up. And so I think it is important to remember, while the danger is acute and real, authoritarianism thrives on a sense of hopelessness, on a sense of nihilism, on a sense that nothing matters. And democracy thrives on a sense that everything is possible and everything matters. And I think everything that has been done by all the actors who are standing up for our democracy over the last several years has mattered tremendously and will continue to matter. And it's every reason for people to continue engage and playing the role of active citizens, because ultimately we will be a republic, as Benjamin Franklin famously said, if you can keep it. We've actually started a place, ifyoucankeepit.org, where people can stay abreast of how they can remain engaged citizens and stand up for our democracy over these critical next couple of months.
Ian Bassan, if you